there was just something about it that we found to be like a fundamentally uninteresting problem. So like a $3 billion valuation company. So obviously like on our part, it's stupid, absolutely stupid financial decision, but you know, our heart was not in it.
Well, in this episode, we're talking about an amazing entrepreneur, Ashutosh Priyadarshy of Sunsama, CEO, co-founder. This is a YC company. And can you tell us about what you raised, what's the traction so far?
Sure.
And then we can kind of get into what it is.
Yeah, so we have to date raised almost $3 million. We did YC in the winter 2019 batch. And after YC, we raised sort of the bulk of our seed round. The traction to date, we have a few thousand paying customers. We're starting to approach profitability, getting very close. And yeah, so we have some early traction.
Yeah. The best way I describe Sunsama is it's if Google Tasks and Google Calendar had a baby.
Yeah, that's kind of how it started, sort of bringing tasks and calendar together. But sort of since that point, those have now just become kind of the sort of foundational UI elements of the product, if you will. But the kind of core use case and experience of the product is really around daily planning. So each day, each morning, or each evening, as is your choice, Sunsama will help you plan out your workday kind of step by step to make sure that you have kind of a focused, calm, and reasonable and achievable workday each day.
And it's very meta because you use Sunsama to build Sunsama.
That's right. Yeah. It's a very virtuous cycle, I think, is spending a lot of kind of time and attention thinking about how can you work well, like how can you work in a way that you can be ambitious and hardworking without burning out? Like what are the tools that would support that? What are the kind of processes that would support that? And then trying to build a lot of those best practices into the product. So whether it's daily planning or reviewing on your week or time boxing, a number of these different sort of methodologies have worked their way into the product as a result of our own sort of experimentation with the question of how to work well.
Right. So it's not just a calendar and a to-do list. Really, you're baking some personal planning productivity into the tool.
Yeah, the product is much more guided than a product like Google Calendar or your standard kind of to-do list app. Like the sort of morning planning part of the app actually sort of walks you through step by step through sort of the methodology that we think is a good way to plan out your workday.
Yeah. And so tell us about your team. How big is your team?
Yeah, so right now we are 5 people in total. So there's myself and my co-founder, and then the rest of the team is 3 full stack engineers.
Amazing. And a designer? One of the co-founders is the designer?
Yeah, my co-founder, Travis, he pretty much does all of the design.
Yeah.
The rest of us will sometimes create a UI element, but it always gets a look from him before it gets shipped to production.
I love how lean you are. Once I visited your home office and like the 3 of you were just sitting in the kitchen back to back to back, and I couldn't even squeeze through. And I just love the scrappiness and the fact that you're running lean sustainably, have because you've gotten to profitability, so you're like, oh, the bank money is just sitting there.
Getting close.
Yeah, getting close. Let's rewind a bit. Take us back to kind of in the beginning. So tell us a little bit who you are. Were you born here in the States, or where'd you come from?
Yeah.
Study.
I was actually born originally in India. My parents left India. They actually moved to Australia first, left me behind in India with my aunts and uncles for a bit. They came back and got me, and eventually we ended up moving to the States. And I grew up in like Pennsylvania for most of like elementary school, and then moved to the suburbs of DC, which is where I kind of spent most of my childhood and high school, and eventually went to college in Virginia at the University of Virginia. And then literally like 10 days after I graduated, I moved out to California to Palo Alto to work at a startup called LumoBack, which I'm sure you're familiar with because we met through Andrew, who was one of the co-founders at LumoBack. And so I was there for full time for about a year. And then after Lumo, I kind of started the very beginnings of what has now become Sunsama. But the first kind of 5.5, 6 years of what is now Sunsama was a very sort of long, meandering journey through building, launching, failing, iterating, and sunsetting like 6 or 7 different products.
Sounds like me. I can see a lot of that. I didn't realize that that was your first job, and then you just transported to Palo Alto. So, who recruited you, or was it Andrew, like our mutual friend that basically pulled you
that was
into
right. It was
this?
Andrew. So I don't know if you ever met Cha, who's one of my really good friends, but he was working at Lumo like the summer before I joined, and I happened to be on a trip to Palo Alto, and I was just grabbing dinner with him, and he had forgotten his like laptop or something back at the office. So I just walked back there with him to like help him pick it up. And Andrew was just hanging out there, and he was standing like by a whiteboard and was thinking about some sort of signal processing problem. And a lot of the stuff that I had studied in college at the time was, DSP or digital signal processing. And we just started talking about stuff. And, one thing led to another. And that winter, before I graduated, I actually flew out and worked with Lumo for a bit. And then that eventually turned into a full-time thing.
Yeah, that was one of our early clients moving to the Bay as well, and I thought it was a good idea. The premise of fixing lower back problems with a posture device. It was certainly our first IoT project that had something to the first or second that had to do with a fitness wearable. We had another wearable client around the same time as well, but that was in my mind, it was a really cool project. What you guys had done so far, yeah.
Yeah, I really liked working on it. Personally, for me, the whole reason I was attracted to it was just like this idea that you're getting to build something that people are actually using. And that was really tangible because you could see the product on somebody's body, for example. You could see the product hanging on the shelf in the Apple store. And cool. A lot of the work I had done before that, like in internships or projects or whatever, had been like stuff that was just like a line item in some like massive like government budget. And like it was interesting work, but the fact that nobody used it really kind of was uninspiring, to say the least.
Yeah, or nobody you knew, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like when we have clients where, yeah, we have tech clients that people's parents don't know anything about, but like when we work on, say, a launch for a Nike shoe that our employees' brother knows, right? Like, oh, I know that shoe. Like, I understand it. I can relate, and we help with a certain piece of it. It makes it relatable.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember one of the first. You guys had hired us to do a UX audit. So, like, one of my feedback early then was like, the UX felt like it was a ruler. Like every time I did something wrong, it would just smack me like, oh, bad posture, bad posture, bad posture. So that was like my report. And then I thought it was funny when it was released. It was like TechCrunch or somebody wrote about it, and they had similar feedback that just made them feel like they were being punished.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, in a lot of ways, it was very the product itself was kind of, I guess, like Pavlovian in a sense, right? It was like when
Yeah,
your posture would slip, it would literally vibrate on your back to like train you to remember to,
yeah,
sit up
yeah,
straight. So I mean, I guess it's an effective way to correct a behavior.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. Oh, it could have gone in another way, right? It's like, oh, you did 1 minute of this, like
yeah,
achievement
yeah,
unlocked, or you did 5 minutes of it. You could set some settings like, hey, I'm an amateur, I'm a, novice, I'm a medium. I wanted hardcore. Hardcore is like you deviated a little bit, just,
yeah.
turn
And I
out.
think oftentimes people they resonate with positive and encouraging user experiences. One of the things I've seen a lot in Sunsama is we made a very deliberate decision that if a task was overdue or wasn't finished on the day it was scheduled, not to show like a gigantic red alert on the task. Like a lot of products will do that. Like your thing is overdue, so it's like a big red thing. And we just kind of decided like the reality is of work is a lot of times just things don't get done exactly when you expect them to, and that should be okay. And I've had so many people reach out and be like, "Oh, I love that this product doesn't like sort of admonish me for doing the wrong thing," and that I don't know. It's kind of cool to see people encouraged and try to work towards something when the UX is positive.
Yeah. What's been the biggest challenge so far?
I think, well, if we look back at just like where we spent our time, I think fundamentally the hardest thing was always building something that people actually want, and like finding that first thing that really clicks with users and getting them into it. As soon as we had that, like everything just got easier and easier. Like whether it was fundraising or hiring or growing or figuring out how to build things that retain better. It's like once you have a clear idea of like what people actually want and what problem they want solved, it's easier. But getting to that point and having that just clarity about what you're building, I think is what took us the longest time. In fact, for us, it took us years. So
Yeah. It's taken me years. Like I think our stories, right? Building products, tons of failed products. That took years to when you
yeah.
finally got this one right.
And but the interesting thing about all the products that you build where you fail either in terms of like revenue or customers or traction or whatever is that you are building a deeper intuition for how to build products that resonate with people, because you're at least getting the data point like, oh, this does not resonate and why. And so that helps you as you make decisions in the future. But it's still hard.
Yeah. Yeah. If you come out of it with a better framework for just making decisions, then you kind of get better.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing was not even just like a framework for making decisions, but a framework for kind of interpreting early feedback. I think that was something that we were not very good at early on. It's just like when somebody said like, "Oh, hey, this is cool. I want to try it." You take that as like a high bar, as a signal of like, "Oh, I'm onto something." But like as you refine sort of like your own taste for like what is a product that people want and feedback, you start to like be able to read between the lines of customer feedback or early user feedback and see if it's like really sort of has like emotional resonance, and if it's actually something they care about or if they're just kind of like um, you know just just like jerking you around
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Not to take it back to LumoBack, but since we worked on it together for such a long time, why do you think that failed?
I left after a year or so of working there, and after that they pivoted to a number of different products, like one that you wore kind of higher up on your shirt that was for
Right.
more like measuring or more for like the attractiveness side of posture, like
Mm,
looking good. So I don't feel qualified to speak, but I imagine that it's just like it was probably just like a really hard business to execute, regardless of whether you were building something people desperately wanted. I mean, it's a hardware product that has to get manufactured. Your costs are going to be super high. I'm sure, I think even with like world-class products like Fitbit, retention is quite low typically.
Yeah.
Like people will buy it and then they don't keep it around. It's a one-time purchase. So that makes a sustainable business model harder to execute. So I think it's just, I don't know, like the kind of at the customer level, why it may have failed. But like operationally, it seems like it was just like you were playing in hard mode from the get-go, right?
Yeah. When you're playing
Startup.
hardware, you buy it once, and you're right. I mean, I have a Samsung watch, I have an Apple watch, I have the Nokia Wii things, I had a Pebble watch, and I wear none of those.
Yeah. And I think it was also at a time where like wearables and sort of quantified self was, I don't want to say it was a bubble, but it was like this big, new, exciting area to
hot.
explore. And people were trying lots of things and there was a lot of promise, but we weren't sure like what is the thing that people actually want.
Yeah.
And I think if we looked like 10 years later, what it is that people want is like, they just want like a pedometer and like
right.
a GPS tracker and like that, at least at the, the consumer scale for everyone. And maybe some like, run tracking, some of the kind of basics.
Heart zone. Yeah.
And, lower back pain and posture is obviously quite a niche area to work in. And, if your price is kind of similar to a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, it's like the market is not that big, I would imagine, compared to everybody who wants a pedometer.
Yeah. Well, tell us, before you got to Sunsama, tell us about some of the failed experiments or projects.
One of the earliest things we built, which I thought was kind of cool, was we built a sort of AI, if you will, really just a bot, a chat bot style tool that you could CC on any email and it would respond with your time, your availability time. So if you emailed me, I would CC this bot and say like, hey, find a time with Peck. And it would just go off and finish the rest of the correspondence with you about finding a time. And, it did neat things like parse my natural language, et cetera. And so one of the reasons we decided to stop on that one was that we had some early power users for that product. And, they would say like, oh, I want to be able to send sort of richer text that it can parse about, the instructions that I give it. And so we would just keep powering up our kind of natural language processing engine to handle more and more. But the more and more we made it capable of processing, the higher and higher the customer or the user expectations went for what it was capable of. And so it would always basically fall short of people's expectations.
Kind of like
and it
Alexa.
just felt like, yeah, exactly. And now with the difference is like now with like Alexa and Google in our home, it's like, it's so ubiquitous that we just know the limitations. Like you're not going to do anything other than start a timer or like play music. Yeah. You're just like, which things work and which things are going to drive you insane, and you avoid the ones that will drive you nuts. Right. And it was different for that. Yeah. Like people expected that this was just going to work. And so it was like two options. Either you figure out how to like offload the processing to humans, which we weren't particularly interested in doing. Or the other thing was try something else. And so we decided to try something else. So that was one of our earliest failures, actually.
Another company, instead of NLP, they used just UI and created Calendly.
So funny enough, before Calendly was big, maybe before Calendly even existed, that was the next pivot that we made from the like natural language processing. Actually, maybe Calendly did exist at that time. And we basically pivoted to exactly like Calendly. It was like you had a link, you could set up different event types, you could share it. And again, we had early customers, and that was one where we looked at it and we built it. It was working. We had users, and we were like, okay, now we just have to grow this for the like indefinitely. Like it works. And there was just something about it that we found to be like a fundamentally uninteresting problem. Like sharing links to schedule time on your calendar for us, it didn't solve the itch that we had set out to solve, basically. And we were just like, we don't really want to work on this. This does not seem that fun. I mean, obviously it's like a great business. So,
And
maybe it
Calendly
was a
is huge.
financial, yeah, it's like a $3 billion valuation company. So obviously like on our part, it's stupid, absolutely stupid financial decision. But our heart was not in it, and it just didn't feel fun to work on.
Yeah. Yeah. Founder product, you found product market fit. You just didn't find the founder product market fit on that
Yeah,
one.
exactly. And, we had set out with this idea of like, okay, we wish there was a way to be more thoughtful and intentional with what we were going to do with our workday each day, especially knowing that like, potentially for the next 40 years, we'll be sitting behind computers being paid for our time. And it's crazy that, Outlook is going to be, or Google Calendar will be the best possible tool to do that.
Yeah.
And, something like having a link that allows you to kind of control when people will book your time, it certainly solves like a subset of that problem space, but it was like, it felt very kind of transactional in a way, in that it was like, okay, it's just making this process more efficient, but not, it kind of lacked that sort of human feeling of like, I'm a person and I want to figure out how to use my time in a way that makes me feel fulfilled and thrive in my work and my life. And it felt too narrow, basically, of a question to pursue.
I have this idea around, I think people try to do this anyways, right? They organize their day, like the productivity people, right? They organize their day around, they batch stuff, they group stuff. Like, for my podcast, these are my Fridays, my Friday afternoon, I batch process my podcast interviews. My Thursdays are my one-on-one days. So like, I'm in the mindset of coaching and receive feedback on Thursdays. And then on Fridays, I'm like in my mindset of talking to strangers and telling stories. Like mornings are my time when it's like, I'm fresh, I'm creative. I don't want to answer emails. I don't want negative energy. I think maybe like some sort of wearable with like a dynamic calendar almost. Like everybody's wearing an Apple Watch, and if you can get like a sense of this person's energy or something, you could almost dynamically optimize their day for the best output for that thing. It's like, oh, your energy is low, you can now go do email, like the brainless stuff. Oh, you have, maybe your brain
That's
is
interesting.
like,
Yeah,
in a
is
creative
actually
mode. You should go write your, you should think about strategy.
Yeah, I think, and on that sort of topic, the thing that I'm really interested in is like figuring out how to get people to have those insights themselves and have that level of self understanding. And I think obviously like your tools can help, right? Like looking at your calendar, looking at when you do your best work, looking at like what are your sleep levels on different days depending on like what you did, like activity, all that stuff kind of that quantitative data can help you make that decision. But I think ultimately like the most productive, I don't even want to really use that word, but the most sort of productive people are often people who have like a great deal of, I think, self-awareness and understanding about themselves and how they work, when they work well, and are able to like basically do different types of work at times that are harmonious with the rest of their life, basically. And yeah, I think of productivity more as like what you described, which is like finding the harmony in things more so than like trying to get more things done in the same amount of time.
Yeah. How was the YC experience? Tell me about that.
Oh, I see. It was really intense.
How many, what's the cohort like? How big was it?
Oh man, how many people? I think there were like, I want to say there were like 200 companies. There was definitely more than 150, less than 300. I can't remember exactly. Um,
And how many
but
did they accept?
like in terms of percentage,
Yeah.
I think we're not supposed to say.
Oh, okay.
That's what I was told, I think, or maybe I'm misremembering. They did
Gotcha.
they did tell us that we were part at the time. We were part of the most selective batch in terms of percentage ever. So uh, I think there's a popular theory that YC batches are becoming diluted and weak, but actually what's happening is that there's more and more people applying than ever. So
But the
anyway,
percentage is still small, but
yeah, in
there's
fact,
just
smaller.
top funnel is just high.
Yeah. But anyway, I digress. Yeah, it was intense. I think it was like 150, 190, something like that. But we were split into like smaller groups. And then within those smaller groups, we're split into even further smaller groups for our sort of weekly office hours. And so that group of maybe sort of 10 companies that we were most closely grouped with were the ones that we got to know the best, sort of week in and week out, talking about metrics, talking about what they're trying to do.
So what's the application process like?
The application process is basically that standard kind of questionnaire that you submit in the YC deadline, before the YC deadline. And, it just asks you questions like, what are you making? Why do people need this? How are you going to make money? How are you going to get customers? And that's roughly it. There's a few other questions in there, but that's kind of the gist of the thing. And it's funny because along those like 5.5, 6 years before Sunsama, as we kind of know it today, I would submit like a YC application every 6 months, like at every batch with whatever we were working on at the time. And I found it to be like a really useful exercise in just like clarifying my own thinking around what we were doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, once you submit the application, you then either get an interview or not. And then the interview is just like a 10-minute Q&A in person with like 2 or 3 YC partners, I think sometimes 4. They ask you a bunch of questions. And then at the end of the day, you either get an email saying that you've been rejected and why, or you get a phone call from somebody who interviewed you saying that you've been accepted. Would you like to accept?
Mm. Yeah, I did something similar. I applied a few years in a row. Never got accepted though.
Yeah, we applied a lot of times. I had heard a rumor from a friend who also was in our batch who applied just as many times as us, and he told us that his company and our company were like tied for like the most applications ever. Obviously, that's like a record that I would imagine will always be broken because there will always be like a longer time span in which you can have applied, right, with each subsequent year. So,
what's that company?
Habitat Logistics.
Okay.
They basically do food delivery.
Ah, so trendy.
Yeah. Hey, people get hungry.
Yeah. Well, you're trendy in a way that, the Asana, ClickUp, that you're definitely on a wave there where some companies were all trying to do this, some of these productivity tools.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So how do you acquire customers?
Yeah, so we basically have only 2 channels that we've sort of experimented with so far. Well, one is just sort of word of mouth growth that we get from our existing customers telling their friends about it and their colleagues about it. And the other one that we've sort of got working at this point is Facebook and paid advertising. But if I'm being perfectly honest, we haven't put too much sort of care into different growth channels until very recently, basically because we were just trying to get to the point that we could prove that we actually had a product that people actually wanted to use, would activate, would convert to paid, would then proceed to stick around. And a lot of our sort of paid marketing efforts were really just about getting new cohorts of data to kind of validate whether our product hypotheses were right. And now we're kind of at the point that we've seen kind of very stable, consistent, and good, I would say, good numbers in our conversion funnels and retention numbers that we feel confident enough sort of moving forward and being like, okay, now we can actually kind of optimize not just for experimentation, but for growth. So I think to answer your question, that's I hope that in the next 6 months I have better answers to that question now that I can actually pursue it.
Yeah. Do you have a referral program or anything like that?
We don't, but I'm actually pretty curious to experiment with building out an affiliate program.
Yeah, I think you should.
Months.
Yeah. As I was thinking about Sunsama, I was thinking like there's a trend right now on productivity. People are like, there's tons of YouTube videos on productivity hacks. Notion, like I don't know about if you know Tiago Forte and his like, how to have a second brain with Notion, and everybody's like productivity porn, right? If you will.
Yeah.
I feel like your product could go into that space, like meaning like could be used for your daily productivity. If you teach productivity within the framework of the product, I think it could resonate.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that, one, I think all of that stuff is becoming increasingly popular because people have a real appetite to understand how they can work better, smarter, faster, more effectively, in a way where they don't burn out and actually get whatever they want to get done. And I think one of the things that we have learned in the process of building this product is how important sort of the educational and motivational components of the product are. So when new users sign up for the first 10 days, we send them sort of a very carefully crafted, like 10-day welcome sequence that kind of teaches them a lot of the sort of basics about how to plan your day, why it matters, and a variety of sort of best practices around that. And funny enough, it's like it's a drip sequence to a product, but I get emails in my inbox all the time from people who have read this, and they'd be like, this is like the best email sequence I've ever gotten. Like, this is like, changed my outlook on my day. And I think that, one of the things is the tools are helpful, but the tools can only help you if you know what you're trying to achieve with them and how to use them and why they matter, right? You could have a full workshop, but if you have no desire to create a beautiful chair or something and you don't know how to use the tools, it doesn't matter that you have these really fancy tools, right? So I think a lot of it comes down to sort of educating people on like what the principles are and why it matters.
Yeah. And finding the people who want to be productive, like you said, you can't give people who are just going to sit around in bed all day long the tools and expect them to want it or resonate.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting sort of subtopic in like selling and marketing a productivity product, is that if you ask anyone, do you want to be more productive? Everyone will say yes. But the percentage of people who really want to do that and are sort of motivated enough to take action and care are a much smaller subset of people. It's just like if you asked anyone like, hey, you want a 6-pack? Everyone's like, yeah, I want a 6-pack or whatever. Like, pick some sort of vanity measure like that of fitness. But not everybody has like the actual desire and sort of dedication to wanting to actually care about that.
Yeah. Well, like even in this podcast, like I'm doing a podcast and you're probably my 9th or 10th episode recording. And I was just looking at some podcast stats. I think Apple 2020, they said there's some reports. There's like 2 million Apple podcasts now in the Apple podcast store. It turns out only like 700,000 something are active. And by active, their definition of active is there's an episode in the last 90 days.
Oh,
So
wow.
like if you have even one episode, in the App Store, you're already doing better than 30% of the App Store, right?
Yeah.
And then it's something like if you get more than 250 downloads per episode, you're already doing better than 10% of the,
Oh, wow.
yeah. And then
Okay.
there's some other stats too, like most of the, and again, there's also like another number, I forget which number it was, but like some large number only have one episode, meaning like they did it once and then like that was it, game over.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like if you can just, get, if you can get 10 episodes out and you can get at least 250 people to listen, you're already at the top 10%.
Yeah, exactly. And
The
I feel
bar
like
is so
it's,
low.
it's, well, you could look at it as the bar is so low, I guess, or I don't know. I almost think of it as the bar is really high to even get to 10 episodes or 1 episodes, or like if you think about like a startup, it's like it's really hard to get 100 customers,
Yeah,
and then it just gets harder and harder to get to 1,000 customers. But like
sure.
you get to that point, you're like way further along than like most people would sort of dream of being. And obviously getting to 100,000 or 1 million customers feels like another dream in and of itself. But
Yeah.
I think people discount how hard it is to create anything of value because there's so much of it floating around everywhere. Like we use all of these products that are valuable. We read all these books, we see all this content. But
Yeah.
it's hard to make. It takes a lot of effort from someone or some people to
A
make that
group,
happen.
a team of, a lot of times it's a group of really, really talented people, a lot of money to create that. And
Yeah,
because it's so easily delivered, like in a small phone, I think it's easy to trivialize how hard it was.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people they just become accustomed to it. But I think that's one of the most fun things about actually building something. Like, if I want to like really boil it down, like what does our app look like? It's like a bunch of check boxes on a website, and it's like you could be like, oh, that seems easy. And in fact, like every starter project for like learning how to code is like make a to-do list app, right? And it's funny because if you like go to Dribble or you go to like Product Hunt or whatever, you'll see like a new to-do list app launching every day. But to just like stay alive long enough and like be consistent enough in producing something of value, I think is often more valuable than having some sort of edge of novelty.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned like a to-do app as being like the hello world of the app design. Last week I gave a workshop to Princeton, like a design workshop to teach design. And you guessed it, it was a to-do list app. You got the list of lists, and then the list of, like you click down and you see the list of to-do items for that list. And I just did, it was an hour and a half, so you only had like 2 screens, and then you had to wire it up and do.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like, talking about like how difficult these things are. It's like, yeah, you can make a to-do list app in an hour or 2 hours. Like if you know how to code, like whatever, you could do it. But like we have been working on it for 3 years and we have like a whole team of people working on it. So it's funny. It's just like the rabbit hole can go pretty deep, from
Yeah.
hello world to,
Oh yeah, I mean your to-do list is in the cloud, and it's got notifications, and people can talk to each other, and yeah, so integrations. You got to keep it up.
yeah. There's a lot that goes into making it actually work for people in their actual workday beyond what's in a hello world.
Oh, here's an interesting question. A lot of founders like writing code and creating and building stuff. I can tell you a lot of creative developer engineers do not like being on call when shit goes down. when you're a 5-person startup, like that's what life is.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that.
I mean, I don't like it. I don't like being like totally just like frantic and harried and being like, I have no idea why it's breaking. Let's try anything to bring it back up before we could solve the problem. But in a way, it's kind of invigorating because you're like, oh, like it's frantic and stressful because it matters. And I always try and keep that in mind if we have like an outage or something. I'm like, oh, the only reason I'm like stressed and worried and sad about this is because it actually matters, not to me, but to someone out there. Like there's someone trying to log into Sunsama right now and they're like, where the hell are my tasks? And so I don't know. I guess in the moments where things go down and they, something breaks, I just try to take solace in the fact that somebody else out there cares, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. As we wrap up, is there any books or resources that you recommend for people who are just kind of starting out so they don't make your same mistakes?
In terms of like not making all of the silly mistakes I made so far in building a startup, I really feel like YC's resources, like their blog posts, and a lot of like Paul Graham's essays are probably the best resource, because in a lot of ways I don't think that you can go to like Medium and find like lots of like sort of derivative content and like people's suggestions, but I think what's really interesting about YC's content is that it feels much more reasoned from first principles than like some guy trying to sell you something, because actually what he wants you to do is click a link at the bottom of the Medium article. So I always found that valuable. And yeah, I've found a lot of great lessons in the posts about sort of how to start a startup from YC and like their startup school, which is now fully like online.
Well, you clicked on the bottom of his link and now you are in YC. So that article, he's trying to sell you something too.
Yeah. I don't know which way that works, but yeah.
So yeah, no, it is a good resource. So thanks for that. And how can someone reach you?
The easiest way is to just email me, ashutosh@sunsama.com. It's ASHUTOSH @SUNSAMA.com. So
put it in the show notes.
I read them. I read all my emails, so just email me.
And do you have any special deals for our audience?
Yeah, if you write into me or our support team and ask for 3 months free because you heard about us on this podcast, just let us know and we will hook you up.